What if I told you that you are holding a miniature star in your hand and it's lying to your brain? For 300,000 years, blue light meant only one thing: the sun, the sky splitting open. The signal to hunt, to move, to survive. Every cell in your body evolved to obey that light. And it did, faithfully, for millennia. But tonight, right now, that same ancient frequency is screaming, "Wake up" at 2 in the morning from a device that fits in your palm. And here's what no one tells you. The light hitting your retinas right now, it isn't just light, it's a chemical command. Every photon at that 480 nanometer wavelength passes through your eyes and reaches deep into the center of your brain, where it physically strangles the production of melatonin, the molecule of peace, the molecule of rest, the molecule that tells your body it's safe to stop. And your brain doesn't know it's looking at a phone. Your brain thinks it's high noon. It is flooding you with cortisol, locking you into alertness, while every tissue, every organ, every exhausted fiber of your being is begging for the dark. But here's where it gets deeper. This isn't just eye strain, this is soul strain. Think about it. Why do you feel more drained after 30 minutes of scrolling than after hours of real work? Because your neurons are trapped in a loop of false alertness with no resolution, no reward, no rest. Your mind is running a marathon and it never crosses a finish line. And this is what I call sensory jet lag. Not the kind that fades after a flight, the kind that never ends. The kind you wake up inside of and fall asleep inside of and carry with you like a weight you can't name. But there is a way out. There is something I call the digital sunset. And in this video, I'm going to show you exactly how it works, why it works, and how to use it to reclaim the biological clock that screens have stolen from you, one night at a time. So, before your brain processes the next pixel, let's go back to the dark. Let's understand the light that is exhausting your soul. There is a frequency of light that your body has known for longer than your species has had a name. It sits in a narrow band of the electromagnetic spectrum, between roughly 450 and 480 nanometers. And for almost every generation of every ancestor you have ever had, it meant one thing, and one thing only. It meant morning. It meant the world is bright, the predators are visible, the fruit is ripe, and you must be awake now, because your survival depends on it. This was not a suggestion. It was not a cultural habit. It was a commandment written into the very architecture of your nervous system over the course of 300,000 years of human evolution. And millions of years before that, back through every primate, every mammal, every vertebrate that ever turned its face toward the sky and felt the day begin. We need to understand what that signal was before we can understand what has gone wrong with it. So let us start at the beginning. Not the beginning of civilization or technology, but the beginning of vision itself. Deep in the base of your brain, just above the point where the optic nerves cross on their way from your eyes to your visual cortex, there is a small cluster of roughly 20,000 neurons called the suprachiasmatic nucleus. It is impossibly small. You could cover it with a grain of rice. And yet this tiny structure is the master clock of your entire body. It does not merely keep time, it dictates time. It tells your pancreas when to expect food. It tells your adrenal glands when to prepare for stress. It tells your immune system when to mount its patrols. and when to stand down. It coordinates the rise and fall of body temperature, the consolidation of memory, the repair of tissue, the clearance of metabolic waste from the brain. Every cell in your body contains its own small molecular clock, but those clocks drift, they lose synchrony. And it is the suprachiasmatic nucleus that reaches out through hormones and nerve signals and pulls them all back into alignment. It is the conductor of an orchestra made of 37 trillion instruments, and the baton it uses, the single most powerful signal it relies upon to know what time it is light. Not just any light, not the warm amber glow of a candle or the deep red of a sunset. The specific, short wavelength, high energy light that dominates the morning sky. Blue light, the ancestral signal. Here is how the system was designed to work. As the sun rises, its light passes through less and less of the Earth's atmosphere. At dawn, the angle is steep and the atmosphere filters out the shorter wavelengths, so the light is warm, golden, heavy with red and orange. But as the sun climbs, the blue frequencies break through. They pour down in enormous quantities, and when those photons, vibrating at 480 nanometers, enter your eye, they do not simply contribute to the image you see. They find a special class of cell. These are not the rods that let you see in the dark, and they are not the cones that let you see color. They are a third kind of photoreceptor, discovered only in the early 2000s, called intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells. They contain a pigment called melanopsin, and melanopsin is tuned with exquisite specificity to absorb blue light. When it does, these cells fire, and they send their signal not to the visual cortex where images are built, but directly through a dedicated neural highway called the retinohypothalamic tract, straight to the suprachiasmatic nucleus. The message is not about what you see, it is about when you are. The master clock receives this signal and it responds. It suppresses the production of melatonin, the hormone of darkness. It triggers a cascade of cortisol, the hormone of waking. It raises your core body temperature. It increases your heart rate. It sharpens your attention, accelerates your reaction time, elevates your mood. It is, in every meaningful sense, the biological switch that separates night from day inside your body. And for most of human history, this switch was flipped by one thing and one thing only: the sun. It rose. You woke. It set. You slept. The rhythm was as reliable as gravity, as old as the rotation of the earth, and your biology was built on the absolute assumption that it would never change. Now, imagine something. Imagine that there was a lighthouse standing on a dark coast, and every creature for miles had evolved to navigate by its rhythm. The beam sweeps around, and when it passes over you, you know which direction is north. You know where the rocks are. You know when to move and when to be still. Every migration, every feeding pattern, every mating cycle is calibrated to that single predictable pulse of light. Now imagine that someone builds a second lighthouse, and a third, and 100 more, and none of them are synchronized. They flash at random intervals, at random intensities, from random directions, all through the night, every night, without end. The creatures do not go blind. Their eyes work perfectly, but they are lost. They cannot find north, because north is everywhere and nowhere. They cannot rest because the signal to rest never arrives, or it arrives and is immediately contradicted. The biology still functions. but it functions in a state of permanent confusion, a kind of perpetual, exhausting alertness that was never meant to last more than a few hours at a time. That is what has happened to the human suprachiasmatic nucleus. In the 1990s, a revolution occurred that we barely noticed because it arrived disguised as convenience. The light-emitting diode, and later the organic light-emitting diode, replaced the older cathode ray tubes and fluorescent backlights in our screens. These new technologies were thinner, brighter, more energy efficient, and they produced a kind of light that looked, to the naked eye, perfectly white and perfectly harmless. But here is what the eye cannot tell you, and what the marketing never mentioned. If you take the light from an LED screen and pass it through a spectrometer, separating it into its component wavelengths, the way a prism separates sunlight into a rainbow, you will see something disturbing. You will see a massive, disproportionate spike in the blue range, right there, right at 450 to 480 nanometers, the exact frequency that melanopsin is tuned to absorb, the exact signal that the suprachiasmatic nucleus interprets as morning. This is what I call the spectral lie. Your screen looks white. It looks neutral, clean, modern, but hidden inside that white is a concentration of blue spectrum energy that your conscious mind does not perceive as blue at all. You see a white page, a warm photograph, a dark movie scene, but your melanopsin cells do not care about the image. They do not process content. They are not watching the movie. They are absorbing photons, and the photons pouring out of that screen are screaming one word at the ancient machinery of your brain. Morning, morning, morning. It does not matter that it is 11 at night. It does not matter that you are lying in bed. It does not matter that you looked at the screen for only 30 seconds to check a notification. A photon from the sun and a photon from your smartphone are identical. They are the same particle, vibrating at the same frequency, carrying the same energy. Your neurons cannot read the label on the source. They have no way to know whether that photon traveled 93 million miles from a star or 6 inches from a piece of glass in your hand. To the suprachiasmatic nucleus, every glance at your phone after dark is a sunrise. Every scroll through a feed at midnight is high noon. And this is not a metaphor. This is photobiology. This is the measurable, quantifiable suppression of melatonin that has been documented in dozens of studies. Exposure to LED screen light in the hours before sleep has been shown to delay the onset of melatonin release by as much as 90 minutes, to reduce its total concentration in the blood, to shift the timing of the circadian phase, and to decrease the amount of REM sleep in the night that follows. The brain does not adapt to this. There is no learning curve. There is no habituation. 300,000 years of evolution built a system that trusts blue light absolutely because, until this generation, blue light had never lied. Think about the scale of what has changed. For the entire history of our species, the only significant source of blue-rich light was the sun, and it was available for roughly 12 hours out of every 24, and only from above, only from one direction, and only at intensities that varied with the seasons and the weather. Now, in the span of a single generation, we have placed a miniature blue light emitter in the hand of nearly every human being on the planet. Not above them, but directly in front of their eyes, at a distance of 10 to 14 inches, held at exactly the angle most effective for retinal absorption. And we have made it available not for 12 hours, but for 24. Not seasonally, but constantly. Not outdoors in the open air, but in the bedroom, in the dark. At the precise moment when the circadian system is most vulnerable to disruption, which is the 2 to 3 hours before natural sleep onset. We have built a world where the sun never sets. Not in the sky, but in our pockets. We carry it with us everywhere, and we pull it out, and we stare into it, and we wonder why we cannot sleep. We have constructed a digital sun, and it is a small, cold, intimate thing, and it lives closer to our eyes than the real sun ever could. And it does not care about the rotation of the earth, or the tilt of its axis, or the ancient rhythm that once governed every living thing on its surface. It just shines, constantly, indiscriminately, a lighthouse that never stops spinning. Consider what this means for the architecture of the modern retina. Your melanopsin cells did not evolve to be stimulated at midnight. They did not evolve to receive high-intensity blue spectrum light at close range in a dark room where the pupils are fully dilated and therefore maximally receptive. Every condition of nighttime phone use is, from a photobiological standpoint, optimized for circadian disruption. The darkness dilates the pupil, allowing more light in. The closeness of the screen increases the intensity of the signal on the retina. The blue spectral composition of the LED targets the exact pigment that drives the waking response. It is as if someone had engineered the perfect tool for convincing the human brain that night does not exist, and then distributed it to 8 billion people and told them to use it right before they try to sleep. The contract between the human organism and the natural light cycle is roughly 300,000 years old, if we count only Homo sapiens, and hundreds of millions of years old if we count the broader lineage of light-sensitive life on Earth. That contract was simple. The sky tells you when to wake and when to rest. You obey, not because you choose to, but because you are made of the same matter and energy as the world around you, and your rhythms are its rhythms. For 300 millennia, nothing broke that contract. Not fire, which burned at long wavelengths the circadian system largely ignores. Not candles, not oil lamps, not even the early incandescent bulb, which was dim and warm and produced almost no blue light at all. The contract survived every technology humans invented, until this one, until the LED, until the screen, until the small luminous rectangle that we hold in our hands like a talisman against boredom and silence. And now the contract is broken, not by an act of war or a catastrophe, but by a quiet, invisible betrayal. A spectral lie told in wavelengths we cannot consciously perceive, absorbed by cells we did not know we had, transmitted to a clock we cannot feel ticking. The digital sun has risen in our bedrooms, and it refuses to set. What happens next is a chemical war. When the master clock receives the signal for morning at a time when morning has not come, it does not simply delay sleep. It initiates a cascade of conflicting hormonal commands that ripple through every system in the body. The melatonin that should be rising is suppressed. The cortisol that should be falling is sustained. The body temperature that should be dropping holds steady or climbs. And somewhere in the dark, behind your eyes, a very old and very precise piece of biological machinery begins to lose its grip on the single most important variable it was ever built to control, which is time itself. That is the war we will follow next. The war fought in molecules and milliseconds. The war for the chemical night that your brain is slowly, steadily losing. In the center of your brain, buried beneath the two hemispheres of the cerebral cortex, nestled behind the thalamus and just above the brainstem, there is a gland the size of a grain of rice. The ancients called it the seat of the soul. René Descartes believed it was the point where the mind met the body, the singular place where thought became flesh. Modern anatomy gives it a less poetic name, the pineal gland. And while it is not the seat of the soul, it is something almost as remarkable. It is a chemical clock, a translating organ, a bridge between the light of the external world and the darkness of your internal biology. Its primary function is to produce one molecule, melatonin. And the story of what we have done to that molecule, quietly, nightly, with nothing more than the glow of a screen, is one of the most consequential and least understood acts of self-sabotage in the history of human health. Let us first understand what melatonin actually is, because most people do not. Most people think of melatonin as a sleep supplement, a pill you buy at a pharmacy when you are jet-lagged, a mild sedative that makes you drowsy. This is like describing the ocean as something that makes your feet wet. Melatonin is not merely a signal to sleep. It is the hormone of darkness. It is the molecule your body uses to announce to every organ, every tissue, every individual cell that the day is over, that the world outside has gone dark, and that it is now safe to begin the most critical work your body does, which is the work it can only do when you are not using it for anything else. When melatonin rises in the blood, it does not simply make you feel sleepy. It initiates a cascade of biological events so vast and so coordinated that we are still mapping their full extent. It tells the immune system to increase its production of natural killer cells, the frontline soldiers against infection and malignancy. It tells the cardiovascular system to lower blood pressure and reduce heart rate. It signals the digestive system to slow motility and divert energy away from processing food and towards cellular maintenance. It crosses the blood-brain barrier and acts as one of the most potent antioxidants the body produces, scavenging the free radicals that accumulate in neural tissue during the metabolic activity of the day. It facilitates the glymphatic system, the brain's waste clearance mechanism, which opens its channels primarily during sleep to flush out the toxic byproducts of conscious thought, including beta amyloid, the protein whose accumulation is the hallmark of Alzheimer's disease. Melatonin is not a lullaby. It is a foreman. It walks through the factory of your body at nightfall, switching off the production lines, dimming the overhead lights, and waving in the night shift. The repair crews, the maintenance teams, the quality control workers who can only do their jobs in the dark, in the quiet, when the machinery of waking life has finally, mercifully stopped. Now imagine that foreman walking through the factory doors, clipboard in hand, ready to begin the night's work, and being stopped. Not by a locked door or a broken alarm, but by a signal from management that says, "Not yet, the day is not over, the sun is still up, go back and wait." And so the foreman waits, and the repair crews wait, and the waste accumulates, and the machinery keeps running, not because there is anything left to produce, but because no one has been given permission to shut it down. That is what happens inside your body every time you look at a screen before sleep. That is the melatonin sabotage. The mechanism is precise and merciless. We traced the pathway in the previous chapter. Blue light enters the eye. It strikes the melanopsin-containing retinal ganglion cells. Those cells fire a signal along the retinohypothalamic tract to the suprachiasmatic nucleus, the master clock. And the master clock, interpreting this signal as morning, sends a command down a specific neural pathway through the superior cervical ganglion to the pineal gland. The command is simple and absolute. Stop. Do not release melatonin. The sun is still shining, and the pineal gland obeys because it has no capacity for skepticism. It cannot check a clock on the wall. It cannot look out a window. It receives a neural command and it executes it. If the suprachiasmatic nucleus says it is daytime, then it is daytime. Even if every other signal in your environment, the darkness of your bedroom, the fatigue in your muscles, the heaviness of your eyelids, is screaming that it is not. This is the invisible conflict. This is the state I want you to understand, not merely as a concept, but as a felt experience, because almost every one of you has lived it without having the language to describe what was happening. You are lying in bed. It is late. Your body is heavy. Your muscles ache with the honest fatigue of a day fully spent. Your eyes sting. Your breathing wants to slow. Every peripheral signal your body can generate is telling you that it is time to sleep. But you cannot sleep. You are tired in your body, but awake in your brain. You are exhausted, but alert, drained, but wired. And there is a specific, restless, almost anxious quality to it, as though your mind is searching for something it cannot find, trying to cross a threshold that keeps receding. You may attribute this to stress, to caffeine, to an overactive mind, but what you are actually experiencing, in many cases, is a state of biological limbo. Your homeostatic sleep drive, the simple pressure to sleep that builds with every hour of wakefulness, is high. It is pushing you toward unconsciousness. But your circadian alerting signal, driven by the suprachiasmatic nucleus, has not yet stood down. It is still broadcasting the chemical signature of day. Melatonin has not risen, or it has risen only weakly, too late, in insufficient quantities. And without melatonin, the gate to deep sleep does not fully open. You hover at the threshold. You drift in a shallow, unsatisfying twilight that is neither true rest nor true wakefulness. You are a soul caught between a day that will not end and a night that cannot begin. The research on this is not ambiguous. It is not preliminary. It is not contested. Study after study, conducted at Harvard, at the University of Basel, at Brigham and Women's Hospital, at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, has demonstrated the same finding with numbing consistency. Exposure to blue-enriched LED light in the hours before sleep suppresses melatonin production. The magnitude varies by study, but the direction never does. Some studies have shown that as little as 10 minutes of screen exposure at close range in a dark room can measurably delay the onset of melatonin secretion. Others have shown that 2 hours of evening screen use can push melatonin onset back by 90 minutes or more, effectively relocating your biological midnight to 1:30 in the morning while the clock on your wall still reads 12. And this is not a delay that corrects itself easily. The circadian system is not a light switch that flips instantly. It is a heavy wheel, a flywheel of molecular feedback loops involving the clock genes, purr, cry, BAL1, and clock. And once that wheel has been pushed out of phase, it takes time, sometimes days, to return to its natural position. One night of late screen use does not just cost you one night of sleep. It shifts the entire phase of your circadian rhythm forward, so that the following night, your melatonin still rises late, and the night after that, it rises late again, and you find yourself trapped in a slow, grinding drift away from the rhythm your body was built to keep. Consider what is lost when the repair crews cannot do their work. Consider the brain first. During deep sleep, which is the stage most dependent on properly timed melatonin release, the glymphatic system increases its activity by as much as 60%. Cerebrospinal fluid pulses through the interstitial spaces of the brain, collecting metabolic waste, carrying it away, clearing the neural landscape for the next day's work. When this process is shortened or disrupted, the waste accumulates. Beta amyloid accumulates. Tau proteins accumulate. The very substances that define neurodegenerative disease are the substances your brain was supposed to clear last night while you were scrolling through a feed and telling yourself you would put the phone down in just 5 more minutes. Consider the immune system. Melatonin does not merely support immune function, it modulates it. It enhances the activity of T cells. It increases the production of interleukin 2, a cytokine critical for immune response. It acts as an anti-inflammatory agent, reducing the chronic, low-grade inflammation that is now understood to be a driver of cardiovascular disease, metabolic syndrome, and certain cancers. When melatonin is suppressed, the immune system does not shut down, it dysregulates. It becomes less precise, less targeted, more prone to the kind of overreaction that manifests as chronic inflammation, and less capable of the kind of focused response that eliminates infected or malignant cells before they can proliferate. You do not feel this happening. There is no pain signal for a missed immune patrol. There is no alarm bell for a cancer cell that should have been caught and was not. The damage is silent, cumulative, and statistical. It does not announce itself. It simply increases the probability, night after night, that something will go wrong. Consider the cardiovascular system. Blood pressure follows a circadian pattern. It is supposed to drop at night, a phenomenon called nocturnal dipping, and this drop is critical for the repair and maintenance of the endothelial lining of the blood vessels. Melatonin facilitates this drop. When melatonin is suppressed, the drop is blunted. The blood vessels do not get their period of reduced stress. They age faster, they stiffen, they become more susceptible to the formation of plaques, and the heart, which was supposed to slow down, to rest, to enjoy its own period of reduced demand, keeps working at a daytime pace in a body that is lying perfectly still and doing nothing that requires a daytime heart rate. The cruelty of this situation is in its invisibility. You do not experience melatonin suppression as a dramatic event. You experience it as a vaguely unsatisfying night. You experience it as waking up tired, as needing more coffee, as feeling slightly off in a way you cannot articulate. You experience it as a gradual erosion of the sharp line that should separate day from night, waking from sleeping, effort from recovery. The line blurs, the days bleed into the nights. The nights fail to do what nights are supposed to do. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, you begin to accumulate a debt, not a sleep debt in the simple sense of hours missed, but a repair debt, a maintenance debt, a cleaning debt, as though someone has been skipping the nightly janitorial service in a building that runs 24 hours a day, and the floors are getting dirtier and the air is getting staler, and the equipment is wearing down, and no one can quite figure out why the building is falling apart, because from the outside, during the day, everything still looks fine. There is a phrase that haunts me. Biological limbo, the body begging for darkness, while the brain insists on light. The cellular factory with its repair crews standing idle, tools in hand, watching the overhead lights burn on and on, waiting for a shift change that never comes. Every system ready for night. Every system denied it. The muscles still, the eyes closed, the room dark. And yet somewhere behind those closed eyes, a small gland the size of a rice grain sits silent, suppressed, unable to release the single molecule that would unlock the entire cascade of nightly restoration, because 45 minutes ago, a hand reached for a phone and a retina absorbed a stream of photons at 460 nanometers, and a master clock mistook midnight for morning. The melatonin sabotage does not happen to you once. It happens every night that you end with a screen. And each night, the debt grows a little larger, and the repair falls a little further behind, and the body adapts not by fixing the problem but by lowering its expectations, by accepting a diminished version of rest as normal, by forgetting what true darkness, true chemical night, true restoration actually feels like. But there is another cost we have not yet considered. We have talked about the master clock and the pineal gland and the chemistry of darkness, but we have not talked about the organs that bear the first and most direct impact of this artificial light. We have not talked about what happens at the point of contact, the place where the photons actually land, before any signal is sent, before any clock is disrupted, before any melatonin is suppressed. We have not talked about the eyes themselves, the two fragile, extraordinary, and increasingly overtaxed instruments through which all of this damage enters. They are the first casualties of the digital sun, and they are suffering in ways that most people do not recognize until the damage has already been done. That is where we go next. Your eyes are not cameras. This is the first and most important misconception to dismantle, because everything that follows depends on understanding what your eyes actually are and what they were never designed to do. A camera is a passive instrument. It opens a shutter, receives light, records an image, and the process costs it nothing. Your eyes are not passive. They are active, muscular, metabolically expensive organs that are constantly working, constantly adjusting, constantly burning energy to construct a stable image out of a chaotic flood of photons. And the kind of light that now dominates your visual world, the light that pours from every screen you own, is a kind of light that makes that work harder, more exhausting, and more relentless than anything your visual system was ever built to sustain. Let us talk about the physics first, because the physics explain the feeling. The light emitted by LED and OLED screens is not smooth. It is not continuous in the way that sunlight is continuous. Sunlight contains every wavelength in a broad, even spectrum, and your visual cortex evolved to process that kind of light effortlessly, the way a river flows over smooth stones. Screen light is different. It is dominated by high-energy visible light, which sits at the blue-violet end of the spectrum, between roughly 415 and 480 nanometers. This light has the shortest wavelengths and the highest energy of anything in the visible range, and short wavelengths behave differently than long ones when they enter the eye. They scatter more. They refract at steeper angles. They do not converge neatly on the retina the way longer wavelengths do. Instead, they create a kind of optical noise, a subtle but constant interference pattern that reduces contrast and blurs the edges of the image before your brain even begins to process it. Your brain does not tolerate blur. It cannot. Blurred edges in the ancestral environment meant a threat you could not identify. A shape in the grass that might be a snake or might be a stick. And the difference between those two interpretations was the difference between life and death. So the visual system is wired at the deepest level to reject blur and fight for clarity. And the tool it uses to fight for clarity is a small ring of muscle inside the eye called the ciliary muscle. This muscle controls the shape of the lens. When you look at something far away, the ciliary muscle relaxes and the lens flattens. When you look at something close, the muscle contracts and the lens thickens, bending the light more sharply to bring the near object into focus. This process is called accommodation, and when you are staring at a screen, the ciliary muscle is in a state of sustained contraction, not the rhythmic, varied contraction of an eye scanning a landscape, shifting between near and far, resting on the horizon, tracking a bird across the sky. A fixed, rigid, unbroken contraction, holding the lens in one position, at one focal distance, for minutes, then hours, then most of the day. Now, add the blue light to this equation. The scattering of short wavelengths means the image on your retina is never quite as sharp as your brain demands it to be. So the ciliary muscle contracts harder. It tries to compensate. It microadjusts, constantly, searching for a focal point that keeps slipping, like a hand trying to tune a radio dial that will not stay in position. And while this is happening, another set of muscles is engaged as well. The 6 extraocular muscles that aim each eyeball are working to maintain convergence, keeping both eyes pointed inward at a screen that is only 10 to 14 inches from your face, a distance so close that it requires significant muscular effort to sustain. And the muscles of the brow, the corrugator, and the orbicularis oculi are subtly tensing, narrowing the aperture of the eyelid in an unconscious effort to reduce the amount of scattered light entering the eye, which is why you squint at screens without realizing it, and why, after hours of screen use, the area around your eyes aches with a fatigue that feels as though you have been frowning all day, because in a very real sense, you have been. This is the tightrope walker who never gets to step off the wire. Every muscle involved in vision is engaged, not in the dynamic, varied way that muscles are meant to work, alternating between effort and rest, contraction and release, but in a static, unrelieved way, like a bowstring that has been pulled back and held, not for the moment it takes to release an arrow, but for 6 hours, 8 hours, 12 hours, until the wood begins to crack and the string begins to fray and the entire structure starts to deform under a load it was never meant to carry for this long. But the strain does not stay in the eyes. This is the part of the story that most people miss, and it is perhaps the most important part. Your eyes are not isolated organs. They are the most densely innervated sensory structures in your entire body, and they are connected through a nerve you have probably never heard of to the deepest stress response systems in your brain. That nerve is the trigeminal nerve, the 5th cranial nerve, the largest and most complex nerve in your skull. It has 3 branches that spread across your face, and one of those branches, the ophthalmic branch, carries sensory information from the eyes, the forehead, the upper eyelids, and the bridge of the nose directly to the brainstem. When your eyes are strained, when the ciliary muscle is fatigued, when the cornea is dry, when the extraocular muscles are aching from sustained convergence, the trigeminal nerve picks up those signals and delivers them to a structure called the trigeminal nucleus, which sits in the brainstem and communicates directly with the systems that regulate your autonomic nervous system, your fight or flight response, your baseline level of physiological arousal. This is the connection that transforms eye strain from a local muscular problem into a whole body experience. When the trigeminal nerve is chronically stimulated by sustained visual stress, it sends a low-grade but persistent signal to the sympathetic nervous system, the branch of your autonomic nervous system responsible for arousal, alertness, and threat response. Not a dramatic signal, not the kind of signal that makes you jump or scream or run. A quiet signal, a whisper, a steady, droning hum that says something is wrong, something requires vigilance, the environment is not safe enough to fully relax, and the sympathetic nervous system responds accordingly. It does not launch a full stress response. It maintains a partial one. Heart rate stays slightly elevated. Breathing stays slightly shallow. Muscles throughout the body, particularly in the neck, the shoulders, and the jaw, maintain a slight but measurable tension. Cortisol stays slightly higher than it should be. The body enters a state that researchers call low-level chronic sympathetic arousal, a state that is not dramatic enough to register as anxiety, not intense enough to feel like panic, but persistent enough to prevent the deep, genuine, full-bodied relaxation that your parasympathetic nervous system is supposed to deliver at the end of the day. You are not stressed. You are not calm. You are in between, permanently. And the space in between is the most exhausting place of all. This is why you feel drained after a day of screen work, even when you have not lifted anything heavy, have not run, have not exerted yourself in any way that should produce fatigue. You sit at a desk, you read emails, you scroll through documents, you attend video calls, and by 5 in the evening, you feel as though you have been wrung out, as though something essential has been extracted from you, and you cannot name what it is. What it is neural energy, the raw metabolic fuel that your brain consumes to maintain stable perception. Your visual cortex is the single largest consumer of glucose and oxygen in your brain, and when the input it receives is noisy, scattered, flickering, and fixed at close range for hours, it burns through its resources at an accelerated rate, not doing productive cognitive work, not solving problems or generating insights, but simply stabilizing the image, correcting the scatter, compensating for the flicker, fighting to maintain the illusion of clarity against a signal that is inherently degraded. You are spending your brain's energy on the visual equivalent of running in place. The effort is enormous. The distance covered is zero, and at the end of the day, you are depleted in a way that has nothing to do with what you accomplished and everything to do with what your visual system endured. There is another dimension to this fatigue that deserves attention, and it concerns the simplest and most overlooked mechanical function of the eye, the blink. Under normal conditions, the human eye blinks approximately 15 to 20 times per minute. Each blink serves a critical function. It spreads a thin film of tears across the surface of the cornea, lubricating it, nourishing it with oxygen, washing away debris, and maintaining the smooth optical surface that is necessary for clear vision. When you stare at a screen, your blink rate drops. It drops dramatically, often to as few as 3 to 4 blinks per minute, a reduction of 70 to 80%. This is not a conscious choice. It is an involuntary response to the fixated attention that screens demand. Your brain suppresses the blink reflex because blinking briefly interrupts the visual signal. And when the visual system is locked onto a close, bright, high-contrast target, it resists any interruption, even one that lasts a fraction of a second. The consequence is that the surface of your cornea begins to dry. The tear film breaks apart. The cornea, which is one of the most sensitive tissues in the human body, with a density of nerve endings roughly 300 to 600 times greater than skin, begins to send distress signals. It stings. It burns. It feels gritty, as though there is something in your eye. And these signals travel along the same trigeminal pathway we just described, adding another layer of irritation to the already overtaxed stress response system. You rub your eyes. You blink hard. You feel a momentary relief, and then you look back at the screen and the cycle begins again. The dryness returns. The sting returns. The trigeminal nerve fires again. The sympathetic nervous system hums a little louder. The shoulders tighten a little more. The jaw clenches almost imperceptibly. And you do not connect any of these sensations to the screen, because the screen does not feel like a threat. It feels like nothing. It feels like normal life. This is what I mean by sensory fatigue. It is not the fatigue of hard work. It is the fatigue of constant, low-grade strain without resolution. It is the fatigue of a nervous system that has been kept at a simmer all day and never allowed to cool. It is the exhaustion of a body that has been told, through every autonomic channel available, to stay just slightly vigilant, just slightly tense, just slightly ready for a threat that never materializes and never dissipates. You are not tired because you worked hard. You are tired because you could not stop working. Your eyes could not stop focusing. Your trigeminal nerve could not stop signaling. Your sympathetic nervous system could not stop humming. The wire never went slack. The bowstring was never released. And by the end of the day, you feel not just physical tiredness, but a deeper, more diffuse depletion, something that lives behind the eyes and beneath the skin, something that feels less like fatigue and more like erosion, as though the day did not just use your energy, but slowly, steadily leaked it out through your eyes like water through a crack in a vessel. And here is the cruelest part. You know you are exhausted. You know your eyes hurt. You know you should stop. Every signal your body can generate is telling you to close your eyes, to look away, to step back from the screen and let the whole strained, overtaxed system finally soften. And yet you do not stop. You pick the phone back up. You open the laptop one more time. You tell yourself, just 5 more minutes, just one more video, just one more scroll. Something keeps pulling you back, something stronger than the pain, stronger than the fatigue, stronger than the quiet wisdom of a body that knows it has had enough. That something has a name. It is a molecule, and it is the most powerful behavioral driver your brain produces. And it has formed an alliance with the very screens that are destroying your rest. It is dopamine. And to understand why you cannot put the phone down, even when every part of you is begging you to, we must go deeper into the reward circuitry of the brain, into the loop that was built to keep you alive and has been hijacked to keep you scrolling. That is where we go next. You have felt it. You may not have had the language for it, but you have felt it. That moment, late at night, when the room is dark and the world is quiet and your body is heavy with the kind of fatigue that should, by every reasonable measure, carry you into sleep. And instead of closing your eyes, you reach for the phone. You do not reach for it because you need information. You do not reach for it because someone is calling. You reach for it because something pulls you. Something beneath conscious decision, beneath rational thought. Something that feels less like a choice and more like gravity. The screen lights up. The darkness of the room collapses around that single bright rectangle. And for a moment, a brief, shimmering, almost imperceptible moment, something shifts in your brain. Not satisfaction, not pleasure, exactly. Something more elusive, a flicker of anticipation, a whisper that says something interesting might be here, something new, something worth seeing. And that whisper, that neurochemical murmur, is enough to keep you looking. One more scroll, one more video, one more minute that becomes 10, that becomes 40, that becomes an hour you will not remember in the morning, except as a vague sense of regret and a tiredness that sleep, when it finally comes, will fail to repair. That whisper has a molecular name, dopamine. And to understand why you cannot put the screen down, even when your eyes ache and your body begs for rest, you must understand what dopamine actually does, because almost everything the popular culture has told you about it is wrong. Dopamine is not the molecule of pleasure. It is not the chemical reward you receive when something good happens. That description belongs to other systems. The endorphins, the endocannabinoids, the opioid receptors that generate the warm, settled feeling of genuine satisfaction. Dopamine is something far more dangerous. It is the molecule of wanting. It is the chemical of anticipation, of seeking, of the restless, forward-leaning state that compels you to look around the next corner, to open the next door, to reach for the next thing even when the last thing gave you nothing. Dopamine does not say this is good. Dopamine says there might be something good. And that distinction, the distinction between having and seeking, between satisfaction and craving, is the crack through which your entire night falls. The dopamine system is centered in a small region deep in the midbrain called the ventral tegmental area. The neurons there project their axons forward and upward into a structure called the nucleus accumbens, which is part of the brain's reward circuitry, and from there into the prefrontal cortex, the seat of decision-making and impulse control. When the ventral tegmental area fires, it floods these downstream structures with dopamine, and the subjective experience is not happiness, but readiness, alertness, a narrowing of attention onto whatever stimulus triggered the release. This system evolved to keep you alive. It fired when you spotted ripe fruit in a tree, when you noticed animal tracks in the mud, when you heard a sound that might indicate prey or might indicate danger. It was the system that kept you exploring, kept you foraging, kept you engaged with the environment, even when you were tired, even when you were hungry, even when every other part of your body wanted to stop. It was built to override fatigue in the service of opportunity, and that is precisely what makes it so devastating when it is activated by a screen in a dark room at midnight. Here is the neurological link that most people do not know about. Light intensity, particularly blue spectrum light intensity, has a direct modulatory effect on dopamine pathways. Research conducted over the past 2 decades has demonstrated that bright light exposure stimulates dopaminergic activity in the brain. The retina itself contains dopaminergic neurons, and the signal that travels from the eye to the brain carries not only circadian information to the suprachiasmatic nucleus, but also arousal information that influences the ventral tegmental area. When bright, blue-rich light hits your retina, it does not simply tell your master clock that it is daytime. It also nudges the reward system into a state of low-level activation, a state researchers describe as anticipatory arousal, not a full dopamine spike, not the dramatic rush of a drug or a victory. A subtle, persistent elevation, a background hum of wanting, a readiness to engage, to seek, to scroll, to consume, that sits just below the threshold of conscious awareness and gently, continuously prevents you from disengaging. Now consider the conditions under which most people use their screens at night. The room is dark, the screen is bright, and that contrast, that vast perceptual gulf between the void of the room and the luminous rectangle in your hands does something extraordinarily powerful to your visual and reward systems simultaneously. In a well-lit room, a screen is one bright surface among many. The brain distributes its attention. The relative intensity of the screen is diluted by the ambient light. But in the dark, the screen is everything. It is the only source of photons in your entire visual field. Your pupils dilate in the darkness, opening wide to gather what little light is available. And then the screen fires its concentrated beam of blue-rich light directly into those fully dilated pupils, and the signal that reaches the retina is amplified, not by technology, but by the physiology of darkness itself. Every pixel hits harder. Every notification glows brighter. The contrast between the dark room and the luminous screen creates a perceptual intensity that your brain reads at the deepest level as significance. Bright things in dark environments meant something in the ancestral world. Fire, moonlight on water, the eyes of a predator. The brain is wired to attend to brightness in darkness because for millions of years, brightness in darkness was never trivial. And now you hold a device that exploits that wiring perfectly, a rectangle of concentrated visual significance in a field of absolute black, and your dopamine system responds exactly as it was designed to, by locking your attention onto it and refusing to let go. This is the moth and the flame. But the metaphor needs correction, because the flame at least offers warmth. The screen offers nothing, or rather, it offers the perpetual promise of something without the delivery. This is the architecture of the dopamine loop. You scroll, and each new piece of content, each new image, each new headline, each new video that autoplays in the feed triggers a micro-release of dopamine. Not because the content is satisfying, not because it is meaningful, but because it is new, and novelty is the primary trigger of the dopamine system. The brain does not evaluate the quality of the stimulus before releasing dopamine. It responds to the unpredictability, the variability, the possibility that the next item might be the one that finally delivers genuine satisfaction. This is the same mechanism that drives a gambler to pull the lever of a slot machine one more time. The last pull gave nothing. The pull before that gave nothing. But the pull after this one, the next one, the one that is always just one away, that one might pay off. And so the hand reaches for the lever again, and the eyes scroll down again, And the dopamine fires again, not as a reward for what was found, but as a lure toward what might be found, what is always almost there, shimmering just beyond the edge of the screen, never arriving, never receding, always just one more scroll away. And here is the paradox that sits at the center of this trap. The paradox I call the dark paradox. You reach for the screen to relax. You tell yourself that you are unwinding, decompressing, giving your mind a break after a long day. And subjectively, in the first few moments, it feels that way. The content distracts you from your thoughts. The light fills the darkness. The dopamine provides a faint buzz of engagement that feels, if you do not examine it too closely, like comfort. But what is actually happening in your neurochemistry is the opposite of relaxation. The blue light is suppressing your melatonin. The brightness in the dark is amplifying your dopaminergic arousal. The trigeminal nerve is feeding low-grade stress signals into your sympathetic nervous system. The novelty of the feed is keeping your prefrontal cortex in a state of vigilant monitoring, scanning each new stimulus for relevance, making micro-decisions dozens of times per minute about whether to keep watching or scroll past. You are not resting. You are not even close to resting. You are operating a complex cognitive and neurochemical machinery at high intensity while lying in a position that looks, from the outside, like perfect stillness. The body is horizontal. The mind is running. This is the digital thirst. It is the compulsion to keep drinking from a source that makes you thirstier. The water is salt water. Every sip increases the craving. Every scroll primes the system for one more scroll. Every minute of screen time in the dark digs the dopamine groove a little deeper, making it a little harder to disengage, a little harder to choose the darkness over the light, a little harder to accept the quiet emptiness of a room without a screen, because that emptiness now feels, to a brain marinated in dopaminergic anticipation, not like peace but like deprivation. The absence of the screen no longer feels neutral. It feels like something is missing. And that feeling, that subtle gnawing sense of lack, is not a reflection of reality. It is a withdrawal symptom. It is the signature of a reward circuit that has been trained night after night to expect stimulation at a time when it should be winding down, and that now interprets the absence of that stimulation as a deficit that must be corrected. Think about what this means for the attempt to fall asleep. You finally put the phone down, you place it on the nightstand, screen down, and you close your eyes. And what do you feel? Not the gentle descent into drowsiness that should follow the end of a day. You feel a restlessness, an itching in the mind, a vague, objectless desire to check something, to see something, to engage with something. Your thoughts dart. Your attention, trained by hours of rapid stimulus switching, cannot settle on nothing. It searches for the next scroll, the next novelty, the next micro-hit of dopamine, and finding none, it generates its own, replaying worries, cycling through plans, composing imaginary conversations, anything to fill the vacuum that the screen has left behind. This is not insomnia in the classical sense. This is the afterimage of dopaminergic arousal. It is the reward system, slowly, reluctantly powering down, like an engine that has been run too hard for too long and cannot idle smoothly. The RPMs drop, but they drop unevenly, with surges and stalls, and the subjective experience is that maddening state of being tired but unable to stop thinking, exhausted but unable to surrender to the emptiness that sleep requires. And all of this, the melatonin suppression, the sympathetic arousal, the dopamine loop, the sensory fatigue, converges on a single physiological outcome that we have not yet fully examined. Because while the dopamine system has been keeping you seeking, and the blue light has been keeping your master clock convinced that it is morning, another system has been responding to all of this confusion with the only tool it knows: stress hormones. Cortisol, the molecule that was designed to spike at dawn and decline through the day, has been receiving contradictory signals all night long. It has been told to stand down by the clock on the wall and to mobilize by the light on the retina. It has been told to rest by the posture of the body and to stay alert by the activation of the reward system. And caught between these impossible instructions, the adrenal glands have been doing what they always do when the body cannot decide whether it is safe or in danger. They err on the side of danger. They release cortisol, not the sharp, life-saving spike that accompanies real threat, but a slow, steady, grinding elevation that seeps through the bloodstream like a stain, touching every organ, every tissue, every cell, telling them all the same thing: do not rest, do not repair, something is wrong, stay ready. That cortisol tide, that false morning written in stress hormones, is what we must follow next. There is an alarm going off inside you right now, and you cannot hear it. It does not ring in your ears. It does not flash before your eyes. It sounds in a language older than words, older than thought, a language spoken in molecules and written in the chemistry of your blood. The alarm is cortisol. And if you looked at a screen tonight before closing your eyes, if you checked a message or watched a video or scrolled through a feed in the dark of your bedroom, then your adrenal glands heard a command that was never meant to be given at this hour, and they obeyed it, because they have no capacity for disobedience, and they began to flood your bloodstream with the single most powerful waking signal your body can produce. Not because you were in danger, not because the morning had come, but because a small rectangle of glass told the oldest part of your brain that the sun was rising, and your brain believed it, and it sounded the alarm, and now the alarm will not stop, and the house is empty, and it is 3 a.m, and no one is coming to turn it off. Cortisol is not a villain. We must understand this before we can understand what has gone wrong. Cortisol is one of the most essential molecules your body produces. It is a glucocorticoid, a steroid hormone synthesized in the adrenal cortex, the outer layer of the 2 small glands that sit on top of your kidneys like caps on a pair of sentinels. Under normal conditions, cortisol follows a pattern so precise and so reliable that endocrinologists call it one of the most robust circadian rhythms in human physiology. It peaks in the early morning, roughly 30 minutes after waking, in a surge called the cortisol awakening response. This surge is your body's ignition sequence. It mobilizes glucose from the liver into the bloodstream, providing immediate fuel for muscles and brain. It raises blood pressure just enough to support the transition from lying down to standing up. It sharpens the immune system's inflammatory response to prepare for the pathogens and injuries the day might bring. It enhances the consolidation of memory, priming the hippocampus for the learning that lies ahead. And then, having done its work, cortisol begins a long, slow decline through the rest of the day, falling steadily through the afternoon and evening, reaching its lowest point around midnight, clearing the stage for melatonin, for the parasympathetic nervous system, for the deep biological quiet that makes restorative sleep possible. The rise and fall of cortisol is not a minor fluctuation. It is the hormonal spine of your entire day. It is the chemical architecture of waking and sleeping, of effort and recovery, of action and rest, and it depends, with absolute fidelity, on the signal of light. This is what makes the false dawn so devastating. When blue light enters your eyes late at night and travels through the retinohypothalamic tract to the suprachiasmatic nucleus, it does not merely suppress melatonin. It does not merely activate the dopamine system. It also sends a signal through the autonomic nervous system, down through the spinal cord, through the sympathetic chain ganglia, to the adrenal glands themselves, and the message is unambiguous. Morning is here. Begin the cortisol awakening response, and the adrenal glands respond, not with the full, robust spike of a natural morning, but with an inappropriate, untimely, biologically incoherent elevation of cortisol at a time when cortisol should be at its absolute nadir. The body was supposed to be in its deepest trough of hormonal quiet. Instead, it receives a surge of the very molecule that means the day has begun. Feel what this does. Not abstractly, not as a diagram in a textbook, but in the body. Feel the heart rate, which had been slowing toward its sleeping rhythm of 55, 60 beats per minute, subtly accelerate. Not dramatically, not enough to notice. 5 beats per minute. 7. Just enough to push the cardiovascular system out of its resting state and into a low-grade readiness, as though the body is preparing for something, tensing for an event that never arrives. Feel the core body temperature, which should be dropping toward its circadian low around 4 in the morning. Hold steady or begin to creep upward, a fraction of a degree, just enough to prevent the thermal conditions that facilitate deep sleep onset. Because the body cools itself to sleep, and it cannot cool itself when cortisol is telling it to maintain operating temperature. Feel the muscles of the shoulders and the neck, which the parasympathetic system had been slowly releasing, gently tighten again, not into a cramp, not into pain, but into a readiness, a holding pattern, as though the body is bracing for impact. Feel the mind, which had been drifting toward the loose, associative state that precedes sleep, sharpen slightly, focus slightly, pull itself back from the edge of unconsciousness as though grabbed by the collar. You are in bed. The room is dark. Your eyes are closed, and inside you, a small chemical fire has been lit, and it is burning at exactly the wrong time, in exactly the wrong place, sending exactly the wrong signal to every system that was trying to shut down for the night. This is hyperarousal. It is not anxiety in the clinical sense, though it shares many of the same pathways. It is not panic, though it uses the same hormones. It is a state of physiological readiness without a purpose, a mobilization without a mission, a body that has been told to prepare for a day that is not coming. And the cruelest dimension of hyperarousal is that you may not even recognize it as a symptom. You may simply lie there and think that you cannot sleep, that your mind is busy, that you are a person who has trouble winding down. You may blame your personality, your job, your stress levels. You may not connect the restlessness in your chest and the tightness in your jaw and the racing quality of your thoughts to the 10 minutes you spent looking at your phone 30 minutes ago. But the cortisol does not care whether you connect it or not. It is in your blood. It is binding to glucocorticoid receptors in your hippocampus, which is why your memory keeps surfacing worries and unfinished tasks. It is binding to receptors in your amygdala, which is why those worries carry an emotional charge that feels slightly threatening, slightly urgent, slightly too large for what they actually are. It is binding to receptors in your prefrontal cortex, which is why your executive function, the part of your brain that should be able to say this is not important, go to sleep, is compromised, weakened, unable to override the emotional noise coming from below. I want you to understand something about what I call chemical jet lag. When you fly across time zones, your body's circadian rhythms fall out of alignment with the local environment. Your cortisol peaks when it should trough. Your melatonin rises when the sun is up. Your body temperature oscillates at the wrong times. And the result is that specific, miserable, disorienting feeling of being profoundly out of sync, tired but unable to sleep, awake but unable to function, hungry at the wrong times, alert at the wrong times, a stranger in a temporal landscape that does not match your internal clock. This is jet lag, and it typically takes 1 day of recovery for every time zone crossed. Now consider what happens when you look at a blue light emitting screen at 11 at night. Your suprachiasmatic nucleus receives the signal for morning. Your cortisol begins to rise as though it was 6 in the morning. Your melatonin is suppressed as though the sun were up. Your body temperature begins to behave as though the day has started. In hormonal terms, you have just traveled 5 to 7 time zones in the span of a few seconds, without leaving your bed, without boarding a plane, without any of the external cues that would help your body gradually adjust. You have inflicted jet lag on yourself, instantaneously, in the dark, and you will do it again tomorrow night, and the night after that, and your body will never fully recover because the displacement is renewed every 24 hours. You are not traveling through time zones. You are oscillating between them, lurching forward and snapping back, night after night, and the circadian system, which was designed for the slow, predictable rhythm of a rotating planet, is being shaken like a compass in the hand of someone who will not stand still. The contradiction is stark, and it is physical. You are lying down. Your muscles have done no work. Your environment poses no threat. Every external signal available to your senses confirms that it is nighttime, that you are safe, that there is nothing to fight and nowhere to flee. And yet your blood carries the chemical signature of a body that is bracing for action. Cortisol is telling your liver to release glucose. Your blood sugar is rising in preparation for muscular effort that will never occur. Your immune system is shifting from its nighttime anti-inflammatory mode to its daytime pro-inflammatory mode, preparing for wounds and infections that are not coming, and in doing so, it is generating the very inflammation that, over time, damages blood vessels, promotes insulin resistance, and creates the conditions for chronic disease. Your kidneys are adjusting their filtration rate. Your gut motility is changing. Your platelet aggregation is shifting. Every system in your body is receiving conflicting instructions, a biological contradiction so deep and so pervasive that there is no single organ that escapes it. You are exhausted, but chemically locked into alertness. You are still but hormonally mobilized. You are safe, but biochemically convinced that you are not. This is not a minor inconvenience. This is not about feeling a little tired the next day. Chronic elevation of nighttime cortisol, the kind that occurs night after night in people who habitually use screens before sleep, has been linked in longitudinal studies to a litany of consequences that read like a catalogue of modern disease: impaired glucose metabolism and increased risk of type 2 diabetes, because cortisol raises blood sugar and repeated nighttime elevations erode insulin sensitivity over time. Increased visceral fat deposition, because cortisol specifically promotes the storage of fat around the internal organs, the most metabolically dangerous type of fat accumulation. Suppressed immune function, because while acute cortisol sharpens the immune response, chronic cortisol suppresses it, reducing the activity of natural killer cells and T lymphocytes and leaving the body more vulnerable to infection and malignancy. Impaired memory consolidation, because the hippocampus is densely packed with cortisol receptors and chronic exposure damages the very neurons responsible for converting short-term memories into long-term ones. Reduced bone density, because cortisol inhibits osteoblast function, the cells that build new bone. Elevated blood pressure, because cortisol sensitizes the blood vessels to the vasoconstrictive effects of adrenaline and noradrenaline. The list continues. It touches nearly every system, and it all begins with a signal of light at the wrong time, a photon that should not have been there, a false dawn that the body could not distinguish from the real one. Think of the captain of a ship deep in the middle of the night watch. The sea is calm, the crew is sleeping, the engines are at their lowest idle, and then, without warning, a signal arrives on the bridge. Full speed ahead, prepare for heavy weather, all hands on deck. The captain does not question the signal. The captain follows orders. The engines roar to life. The crew is shaken from their bunks. The ship lurches forward into the dark, cutting through calm water at combat speed, burning fuel at a rate meant for emergencies, straining every rivet and weld, while outside the portholes, the sea remains perfectly, mockingly still. There is no storm, there is no threat. The signal was false, but the ship cannot unsound the alarm. The crew cannot unfeel the adrenaline. The engines cannot instantly return to idle, and so the ship runs, hard and fast and purposelessly, through the dark hours when it should have been drifting, conserving, resting, repairing. And by morning, the real morning, the crew is already exhausted. The fuel reserves are depleted, and the ship is less prepared for the actual day ahead than it would have been if the false signal had never been sent. That ship is your body. That false signal is the cortisol spike triggered by the light of your screen. And the damage it does is not limited to a single night, because a single night of cortisol dysregulation shifts the timing of the entire hormonal cascade that follows. If cortisol peaked at midnight instead of 6 in the morning, then its decline is shifted forward, which means the natural cortisol awakening response the next morning is blunted, which means you wake feeling groggy and unrested, which means you reach for caffeine earlier and in larger doses, which means the caffeine blocks the adenosine receptors that would otherwise help you feel appropriately tired in the evening, which means you stay up later, which means you reach for the screen again, which means the false dawn fires again, which means the cortisol peaks again at the wrong time, and the cycle tightens, and the rhythm degrades. And what began as a single misplaced hormonal signal becomes a self-reinforcing loop of circadian destruction. This is where we must go next. Not to another single hormone or another single system, but to the rhythm itself, to the master pattern that all of these hormones and signals and responses are supposed to follow. Because what cortisol dysregulation reveals, when you zoom out far enough to see the whole picture, is that the individual disruptions we have been tracing, the melatonin suppression, the dopamine hijacking, the sympathetic arousal, the cortisol elevation are not separate problems. They are symptoms of a single, deeper catastrophe. The circadian rhythm itself, the fundamental oscillation that organizes every process in the human body into a coherent temporal architecture, is breaking down. The clock is not just wrong. The clock is losing its ability to keep time at all. And when the master rhythm fractures, when the body can no longer tell the difference between day and night, between action and rest, between emergency and peace, the consequences reach far beyond a bad night of sleep. They reach into the structure of the mind, the resilience of the immune system, the stability of the metabolism, and the coherence of the self. That fracture is what we must examine next. There is a clock inside you that you have never seen, never heard, and never felt ticking. It does not sit in your chest or your wrist or your brain, though a part of it lives in all three. It is distributed across every organ, embedded in every tissue, written into the DNA of every one of the 37 trillion cells that compose your body. Each of those cells contains a set of genes, the clock genes, and those genes operate in interlocking feedback loops that cycle approximately once every 24 hours, producing proteins that accumulate and then suppress their own production, and then accumulate again, over and over, in a rhythm so fundamental to life on Earth that it predates the evolution of the human brain by hundreds of millions of years. This is not a metaphor. This is molecular biology. You are not an organism that happens to have a clock. You are a clock. Every part of you oscillates. Every part of you keeps time. And every part of you depends, with a fidelity that we are only beginning to fully comprehend, on those oscillations being synchronized, not just with each other, but with the single most reliable external signal the planet provides. The cycle of light and dark created by the rotation of the Earth. The German word for it is Zeitgeber, time giver. It refers to any external cue that synchronizes the body's internal clock to the environment. And while there are several Zeitgebers, including meal timing, social interaction, temperature, and physical activity, one stands above all others in its power and primacy: light. Specifically, the pattern of light and darkness that the eyes deliver to the suprachiasmatic nucleus. This tiny cluster of 20,000 neurons does not merely keep time, it imposes time. It reaches out through hormonal and neural pathways and synchronizes the peripheral clocks in every organ, aligning them to a single coherent rhythm, ensuring that the liver peaks its metabolic activity at the right hour, that the pancreas anticipates food at the right moment, that the bone marrow produces new immune cells at the right phase, that the heart adjusts its electrical rhythm to match the demands of the expected day. This process of alignment is called circadian entrainment, and it is arguably the most important regulatory function your body performs, because without it, you are not a single organism operating in concert. You are a collection of organs playing at different tempos, a body at war with its own timing, a symphony in which every musician has lost the conductor and begun to improvise alone. Imagine a grand clock, the kind that once stood in the halls of great houses, with its pendulum swinging in long, measured arcs and its gears turning in perfect mechanical sympathy, each wheel driving the next, each escapement releasing at precisely the right instant, the whole mechanism producing not just the movement of hands across a dial, but a deep, resonant tick that you could feel in the floorboards. Now imagine that someone has poured a handful of fine sand into the mechanism. Not enough to stop it, not enough to break any single gear, just enough to slow one wheel slightly, to advance another by a fraction, to introduce a creeping imprecision into a system that was designed for absolute accuracy. The clock still runs, it still ticks, but the tick is wrong. It drifts. The minute hand no longer agrees with the hour hand. The chime sounds at 1/4 instead of on the hour. And over days and weeks, the error compounds, and the clock that once told perfect time now tells a time that belongs to no real place. A phantom hour, a fictional day, a temporal nowhere. That is what has happened to the human circadian system under the influence of chronic artificial light exposure. The sand in the gears is the false Zeitgeber, the blue light from screens and LED environments that arrives at times when no light should exist, carrying temporal information that contradicts the actual position of the sun. And the gears that are slipping are not abstract concepts. They are specific, measurable, physiological systems whose timing depends on the accuracy of the master clock. Let us trace the dominoes as they fall. The first domino is sleep itself, and we have already watched it topple. Melatonin is delayed or suppressed. Sleep onset is pushed later. Sleep architecture is degraded, with less time spent in the deep, slow wave stages and less time in REM. But this is only the beginning, because sleep is not an isolated function. It is the temporal anchor around which dozens of other rhythms are organized. The second domino is metabolic. Insulin sensitivity follows a circadian pattern. It is highest in the morning and declines through the day, which is why your body is better at processing glucose in the early hours and progressively worse at it as evening approaches. This rhythm is not arbitrary. 2. It evolved to match the pattern of food availability in a world where eating happened during daylight and fasting happened during darkness. When the circadian clock is disrupted by mistimed light exposure, this rhythm flattens. Insulin sensitivity loses its daily peak. The body becomes less efficient at processing glucose at all hours, not just at night. Studies on shift workers, who represent the most extreme form of circadian disruption, have shown significantly elevated rates of type 2 diabetes, and more recent research has demonstrated that even moderate circadian misalignment, the kind produced by habitual late-night screen use, measurably impairs glucose tolerance within days. The third domino is hunger. Two hormones govern the balance between appetite and satiety. Leptin, produced by fat cells, signals the brain that energy reserves are sufficient and that eating can stop. Ghrelin, produced primarily in the stomach, signals that it is time to eat. These hormones follow circadian patterns. Leptin normally rises at night, suppressing hunger during sleep. Ghrelin rises in the morning, stimulating appetite for the first meal. When the circadian rhythm is disrupted, these patterns degrade. Leptin release is blunted. Ghrelin rises at inappropriate times. The subjective experience is a persistent, low-grade hunger that seems to have no logical connection to actual caloric need. A craving for food, particularly high carbohydrate, high fat food, at hours when the body should be fasting. This is not a failure of willpower. It is a failure of timing. The hormones that should be telling you that you are full are arriving late or not arriving at all. and the hormones that should be quiet are whispering, "Eat, eat, eat," into a body that is lying still in the dark and needs no fuel at all. The fourth domino is immunity. The immune system is not a standing army that operates at constant readiness. It is a precisely scheduled operation whose different branches activate and deactivate according to circadian timing. Pro-inflammatory cytokines peak at night, facilitating the tissue repair and pathogen clearance that occur during sleep. Anti-inflammatory processes dominate the daytime, preventing excessive inflammation during periods of activity when the body is more likely to encounter physical stress. When the circadian rhythm is disrupted, this schedule breaks down. Inflammatory processes that should be confined to the nighttime repair window begin to spill into the daytime. Anti-inflammatory processes that should moderate the daytime response are weakened. The result is a state that immunologists describe as chronic low-grade inflammation, a condition that does not present as a fever or a visible wound, but that silently accelerates the progression of cardiovascular disease, promotes insulin resistance, contributes to the pathology of depression, and creates a permissive environment for the initiation and growth of certain tumors. You do not feel inflamed. You feel tired. You feel heavy. You feel as though something is subtly, persistently wrong, and you cannot identify what it is. The fifth domino is the one that is hardest to measure and perhaps the most important to understand. It is psychological. It is the felt experience of living in a body whose rhythms have lost coherence. I call it biological exile, and I use that word deliberately because exile is not simply being in the wrong place. Exile is being cut off from the place where you belong, the place where your existence makes sense, the place where the rhythms of your life align with the rhythms of the world around you. For 300,000 years, humans lived in temporal communion with the planet. The sun rose and the body woke. The sun set and the body slept. The seasons shifted and the hormones shifted with them. There was no gap between the time the world kept and the time the body kept, because they were the same time, synchronized by the same light, governed by the same rotation, bound by the same physics. And now, for the first time in the history of the species, that communion is broken. We live under artificial light that carries no seasonal information, no positional information, no temporal truth. We eat at hours that bear no relationship to the sun. We sleep at times that bear no relationship to the dark. We work under fluorescent and LED illumination that tells our master clock it is perpetual noon, while the world outside the window moves through dawn and dusk and midnight without us. We have exiled ourselves from the temporal rhythm of the earth, and we have done it so thoroughly and so universally that most of us do not even remember what alignment felt like. The experience of this exile is not dramatic. It is not a crisis. It is something much harder to fight, which is a chronic, low-level wrongness, a feeling of being perpetually slightly out of phase, the fatigue that does not resolve with sleep because the sleep itself is mistimed, the hunger that does not resolve with food because the food arrives when the metabolism is not prepared for it, the restlessness that does not resolve with rest because the rest occurs in a body that is chemically convinced it should be awake. It is permanent jet lag, not the jet lag of a traveler who crossed too many time zones and will recover in a few days, but the jet lag of a person who crosses those zones every single night and resets the damage every single evening and never, ever arrives at a destination where the internal clock and the external world agree. This is the desynchronization of the self. And it is not merely a phrase, it is a physiological reality. Your liver clock drifts away from your brain clock. Your pancreas operates on a slightly different schedule than your gut. Your immune system's inflammatory rhythm falls out of phase with your sleep-wake cycle. The peripheral clocks, which the suprachiasmatic nucleus once held in tight alignment, begin to free-run, each keeping its own time, each responding to its own local cues, meals, activity, temperature, while the master clock, bombarded by contradictory light signals, loses its authority, its ability to impose a single, coherent rhythm on the whole. You become, in the most literal sense, internally fragmented, not broken, not stopped, but scattered. A body whose parts are all still functioning, but no longer functioning together. An orchestra in which the strings are playing in one key, the brass in another, the percussion keeping a different time signature entirely, and the conductor standing at the podium waving a baton that no one is watching. The sound of that orchestra is not silence, it is dissonance. And the subjective experience of that dissonance is something that our culture has given a name to, though we have never fully understood its biological roots. We call it burnout, that bone-deep, soul-level exhaustion that goes beyond tiredness, beyond stress, beyond the normal fatigue of a hard day or a hard week. The feeling of being depleted in a way that a weekend cannot fix, that a vacation only temporarily masks, that seems to live not in the muscles or the mind, but somewhere deeper, in the marrow, in the rhythm, in the fundamental pulse of being alive. We have attributed burnout to overwork, to emotional labor, to the demands of modern life. And those attributions are not wrong, but they are incomplete. Because beneath the overwork and the emotional labor and the relentless pace of the modern world, there is a body that has lost its rhythm, a clock that has been jammed with sand, a biological foundation that can no longer support the weight of the life that has been built on top of it. And that foundation, that shattered rhythm, that circadian ruin, is what makes everything else feel so impossibly, inexplicably heavy. It is this heaviness we must examine next. Not the hormonal mechanics of it, not the molecular pathways, but the lived experience of it, the texture of a mind that has been running on broken time for so long that it has forgotten what synchrony feels like. The feeling of waking up already tired, the feeling of working without traction, the feeling of resting without recovery. The state that the modern world calls burnout, but that biology might call something more precise, which is the total exhaustion of a system that was never designed to run without a rhythm. That is where we go next. There is a clock inside you that you have never seen, never heard, and never felt ticking. It does not sit in your chest or your wrist or your brain, though a part of it lives in all three. It is distributed across every organ, embedded in every tissue, written into the DNA of every one of the 37 trillion cells that compose your body. Each of those cells contains a set of genes, the clock genes, and those genes operate in interlocking feedback loops that cycle approximately once every 24 hours, producing proteins that accumulate and then suppress their own production, and then accumulate again, over and over, in a rhythm so fundamental to life on Earth that it predates the evolution of the human brain by hundreds of millions of years. This is not a metaphor. This is molecular biology. You are not an organism that happens to have a clock. You are a clock. Every part of you oscillates. Every part of you keeps time. And every part of you depends, with a fidelity that we are only beginning to fully comprehend, on those oscillations being synchronized, not just with each other, but with the single most reliable external signal the planet provides: the cycle of light and dark created by the rotation of the Earth. The German word for it is Zeitgeber, time giver. It refers to any external cue that synchronizes the body's internal clock to the environment. And while there are several Zeitgebers, including meal timing, social interaction, temperature, and physical activity, one stands above all others in its power and primacy: light. Specifically, the pattern of light and darkness that the eyes deliver to the suprachiasmatic nucleus. This tiny cluster of 20,000 neurons does not merely keep time, it imposes time. It reaches out through hormonal and neural pathways and synchronizes the peripheral clocks in every organ, aligning them to a single coherent rhythm, ensuring that the liver peaks its metabolic activity at the right hour, that the pancreas anticipates food at the right moment, that the bone marrow produces new immune cells at the right phase, that the heart adjusts its electrical rhythm to match the demands of the expected day. This process of alignment is called circadian entrainment, and it is arguably the most important regulatory function your body performs, because without it, you are not a single organism operating in concert. You are a collection of organs playing at different tempos, a body at war with its own timing, a symphony in which every musician has lost the conductor and begun to improvise alone. Imagine a grand clock, the kind that once stood in the halls of great houses, with its pendulum swinging in long, measured arcs and its gears turning in perfect mechanical sympathy, each wheel driving the next, each escapement releasing at precisely the right instant, the whole mechanism producing not just the movement of hands across a dial, but a deep, resonant tick that you could feel in the floorboards. Now imagine that someone has poured a handful of fine sand into the mechanism, not enough to stop it, not enough to break any single gear, just enough to slow one wheel slightly, to advance another by a fraction, to introduce a creeping imprecision into a system that was designed for absolute accuracy. The clock still runs, it still ticks, but the tick is wrong. It drifts. The minute hand no longer agrees with the hour hand. The chime sounds at 1/4 instead of on the hour. And over days and weeks, the error compounds, and the clock that once told perfect time now tells a time that belongs to no real place, a phantom hour, a fictional day, a temporal nowhere. That is what has happened to the human circadian system under the influence of chronic artificial light exposure. The sand in the gears is the false Zeitgeber, the blue light from screens and LED environments that arrives at times when no light should exist, carrying temporal information that contradicts the actual position of the sun. And the gears that are slipping are not abstract concepts. They are specific, measurable, physiological systems whose timing depends on the accuracy of the master clock. Let us trace the dominoes as they fall. The first domino is sleep itself, and we have already watched it topple. Melatonin is delayed or suppressed. Sleep onset is pushed later. Sleep architecture is degraded, with less time spent in the deep slow-wave stages and less time in REM. But this is only the beginning, because sleep is not an isolated function. It is the temporal anchor around which dozens of other rhythms are organized. The second domino is metabolic. Insulin sensitivity follows a circadian pattern. It is highest in the morning and declines through the day. which is why your body is better at processing glucose in the early hours and progressively worse at it as evening approaches. This rhythm is not arbitrary. It evolved to match the pattern of food availability in a world where eating happened during daylight and fasting happened during darkness. When the circadian clock is disrupted by mistimed light exposure, this rhythm flattens. Insulin sensitivity loses its daily peak. The body becomes less efficient at processing glucose at all hours, not just at night. Studies on shift workers, who represent the most extreme form of circadian disruption, have shown significantly elevated rates of type 2 diabetes. And more recent research has demonstrated that even moderate circadian misalignment, the kind produced by habitual late-night screen use, measurably impairs glucose tolerance within days. The third domino is hunger. Two hormones govern the balance between appetite and satiety. Leptin, produced by fat cells, signals the brain that energy reserves are sufficient and that eating can stop. Ghrelin, produced primarily in the stomach, signals that it is time to eat. These hormones follow circadian patterns. Leptin normally rises at night, suppressing hunger during sleep. Ghrelin rises in the morning, stimulating appetite for the first meal. When the circadian rhythm is disrupted, these patterns degrade. Leptin release is blunted. Ghrelin rises at inappropriate times. The subjective experience is a persistent, low-grade hunger that seems to have no logical connection to actual caloric need. A craving for food, particularly high-carbohydrate, high-fat food, at hours when the body should be fasting. This is not a failure of willpower. It is a failure of timing. The hormones that should be telling you that you are full are arriving late or not arriving at all, and the hormones that should be quiet are whispering, "Eat, eat." Eat into a body that is lying still in the dark and needs no fuel at all. The fourth domino is immunity. The immune system is not a standing army that operates at constant readiness. It is a precisely scheduled operation whose different branches activate and deactivate according to circadian timing. Pro-inflammatory cytokines peak at night, facilitating the tissue repair and pathogen clearance that occur during sleep. Anti-inflammatory processes dominate the daytime, preventing excessive inflammation during periods of activity when the body is more likely to encounter physical stress. When the circadian rhythm is disrupted, this schedule breaks down. Inflammatory processes that should be confined to the nighttime repair window begin to spill into the daytime. Anti-inflammatory processes that should moderate the daytime response are weakened. The result is a state that immunologists describe as chronic low-grade inflammation, a condition that does not present as a fever or a visible wound, but that silently accelerates the progression of cardiovascular disease, promotes insulin resistance, contributes to the pathology of depression, and creates a permissive environment for the initiation and growth of certain tumors. You do not feel inflamed. You feel tired. You feel heavy. You feel as though something is subtly, persistently wrong, and you cannot identify what it is. The fifth domino is the one that is hardest to measure and perhaps the most important to understand. It is psychological. It is the felt experience of living in a body whose rhythms have lost coherence. I call it biological exile, and I use that word deliberately because exile is not simply being in the wrong place. Exile is being cut off from the place where you belong, the place where your existence makes sense, the place where the rhythms of your life align with the rhythms of the world around you. For 300,000 years, humans lived in temporal communion with the planet. The sun rose and the body woke, The sun set and the body slept. The seasons shifted and the hormones shifted with them. There was no gap between the time the world kept and the time the body kept, because they were the same time, synchronized by the same light, governed by the same rotation, bound by the same physics. And now, for the first time in the history of the species, that communion is broken. We live under artificial light that carries no seasonal information, no positional information, no temporal truth. We eat at hours that bear no relationship to the sun. We sleep at times that bear no relationship to the dark. We work under fluorescent and LED illumination that tells our master clock it is perpetual noon, while the world outside the window moves through dawn and dusk and midnight without us. We have exiled ourselves from the temporal rhythm of the earth, and we have done it so thoroughly and so universally that most of us do not even remember what alignment felt like. The experience of this exile is not dramatic. It is not a crisis. It is something much harder to fight, which is a chronic, low-level wrongness, a feeling of being perpetually slightly out of phase, the fatigue that does not resolve with sleep because the sleep itself is mistimed, the hunger that does not resolve with food because the food arrives when the metabolism is not prepared for it, the restlessness that does not resolve with rest because the rest occurs in a body that is chemically convinced it should be awake. It is permanent jet lag, not the jet lag of a traveler who crossed too many time zones and will recover in a few days, but the jet lag of a person who crosses those zones every single night and resets the damage every single evening and never, ever arrives at a destination where the internal clock and the external world agree. This is the desynchronization of the self, and it is not merely a phrase, it is a physiological reality. Your liver clock drifts away from your brain clock. Your pancreas operates on a slightly different schedule than your gut. Your immune system's inflammatory rhythm falls out of phase with your sleep-wake cycle. The peripheral clocks, which the suprachiasmatic nucleus once held in tight alignment, begin to free run, each keeping its own time, each responding to its own local cues, meals, activity, temperature, while the master clock, bombarded by contradictory light signals, loses its authority, its ability to impose a single coherent rhythm on the whole. You become, in the most literal sense, internally fragmented, not broken, not stopped, but scattered. A body whose parts are all still functioning, but no longer functioning together. An orchestra in which the strings are playing in one key, the brass in another, the percussion keeping a different time signature entirely, and the conductor standing at the podium waving a baton that no one is watching. The sound of that orchestra is not silence, it is dissonance. And the subjective experience of that dissonance is something that our culture has given a name to, though we have never fully understood its biological roots. We call it burnout, that bone-deep, soul-level exhaustion that goes beyond tiredness, beyond stress, beyond the normal fatigue of a hard day or a hard week. The feeling of being depleted in a way that a weekend cannot fix, that a vacation only temporarily masks, that seems to live not in the muscles or the mind, but somewhere deeper, in the marrow, in the rhythm, in the fundamental pulse of being alive. We have attributed burnout to overwork, to emotional labor, to the demands of modern life. And those attributions are not wrong, but they are incomplete. Because beneath the overwork and the emotional labor and the relentless pace of the modern world, there is a body that has lost its rhythm, a clock that has been jammed with sand, a biological foundation that can no longer support the weight of the life that has been built on top of it. And that foundation, that shattered rhythm, that circadian ruin, is what makes everything else feel so impossibly, inexplicably heavy. It is this heaviness we must examine next, not the hormonal mechanics of it, not the molecular pathways, but the lived experience of it, the texture of a mind that has been running on broken time for so long that it has forgotten what synchrony feels like. The feeling of waking up already tired, the feeling of working without traction, the feeling of resting without recovery. The state that the modern world calls burnout, but that biology might call something more precise, which is the total exhaustion of a system that was never designed to run without a rhythm. That is where we go next. We have traveled a long way through the dark. We have followed the photon from the screen to the retina. We have traced its signal through the optic nerve to the master clock. We have watched it suppress melatonin, spike cortisol, hijack dopamine, strain the eyes, shatter the circadian rhythm, and leave the body stranded in a permanent false dawn. We have mapped the damage, named the mechanisms, and felt, perhaps for the first time with full clarity, the weight of what the digital sun has done to the ancient machinery of our biology. And now, at last, we arrive at the only question that matters. Can it be undone? Can the clock be reset? Can the rhythm be restored? Can the body find its way back to the dark? The answer is yes. And the answer begins with something so simple that it may seem, after everything we have discussed, almost absurdly inadequate. But simplicity is not the same as insignificance. The most powerful intervention available to you requires no prescription, no technology, no expense, and no expertise. It requires only a decision, made deliberately, made nightly, made with the understanding that you are not merely changing a habit, but honoring a contract that is 300,000 years old. The decision is this: you will give your body a sunset, not the sunset that the sky provides, though that too is powerful, and we will speak of it. A digital sunset, a deliberate, structured tapering of artificial light in the 2 to 3 hours before you intend to sleep. This is not an arbitrary number. It is derived from the physiology of melatonin onset. Under natural conditions, the pineal gland begins to increase melatonin production approximately 2 to 3 hours before habitual sleep time, a phase called the dim light melatonin onset. This is the opening of the biological gate to sleep. It is the moment when the master clock, having tracked the fading light of the real sky, gives the pineal gland permission to begin its work. But this permission depends on one condition: the light must actually fade. If it does not, if blue spectrum photons continue to reach the melanopsin cells in the retina, the gate stays closed, the melatonin stays suppressed, and the entire cascade of nighttime restoration we described in earlier chapters is delayed or diminished. The digital sunset is the act of removing that obstacle. It is the act of letting the gate open on time. The protocol is straightforward. 2 to 3 hours before your intended sleep, you begin to eliminate sources of blue-enriched light from your environment. Screens are the primary target, but not the only one. Overhead LED lighting and fluorescent fixtures also emit significant blue spectrum energy, and replacing them or supplementing them with warm spectrum alternatives is one of the most effective environmental changes you can make. The physics here are simple and worth understanding. Light wavelengths above approximately 550 nanometers, the ambers, the oranges, the deep reds, do not significantly activate the melanopsin receptors in the retinal ganglion cells. They pass through the eye and contribute to vision without triggering the alerting signal to the suprachiasmatic nucleus. This is why firelight, which peaks in the long wavelength end of the spectrum, did not disrupt sleep for the hundreds of thousands of years that humans gathered around it before bed. It is why candlelight, which is similarly dominated by warm tones, carries an almost instinctive association with rest and intimacy. Your ancestors sat by fires every evening for millennia, and their circadian rhythms remained intact because the light they sat by was the right kind of light. It illuminated without deceiving. It allowed them to see, without telling their brains, that the sun was still up. You can recreate this. Amber bulbs and red spectrum lighting are inexpensive and widely available. They transform a room, not just optically, but neurologically. When you switch from the cool white of an LED ceiling light to the deep amber of a warm spectrum bulb, you are not merely changing the aesthetic of your environment. You are changing the information that your retina sends to your master clock. You are telling the suprachiasmatic nucleus that the day is ending. You are giving it permission to begin the hormonal transition to night, and the body responds. Not instantly, not dramatically, but reliably, predictably, the way a river responds to a change in gradient. Melatonin begins to rise, cortisol begins to fall, core body temperature begins to drop. The parasympathetic nervous system begins to gain the upper hand. The bowstring begins, at last, to ease. There is a remarkable finding in the chronobiology literature that I want you to hold in your mind because it speaks to the resilience of the system we have been describing. Studies conducted on subjects who were taken out of their artificial light environments and exposed to natural light-dark cycles, camping studies, they are sometimes called, have shown that the circadian rhythm can begin to realign in as little as 2 to 3 days. 3 days. After weeks, months, years of chronic circadian disruption, the master clock can find its bearing again in 72 hours of natural light exposure, morning sunlight to set the phase, dim evening light to cue the transition, true darkness to complete the cycle. The clock is not broken, it is jammed, and the thing that is jamming it is the false light. Remove the false light, provide the true signal, and the gears begin to turn again, smoothly, accurately, the way they were designed to turn for millions of years before we filled our nights with artificial suns. This does not mean you must go camping to fix your sleep, though it would certainly help. It means that the system is waiting for the right signal. It means that every night you implement a digital sunset. Every evening you spend under warm light instead of blue. Every hour you reclaim from the screen and return to the dark. You are giving the master clock what it needs to pull the peripheral rhythms back into alignment. The liver clock begins to synchronize with the brain clock. The insulin rhythm regains its morning peak. The leptin and ghrelin cycles begin to normalize. The immune system's inflammatory schedule tightens. The orchestra, one instrument at a time, begins to find the conductor again. The dissonance softens. The rhythm returns. But I want to go further than protocol. I want to talk about darkness itself, because we have spent this entire journey treating darkness as the backdrop against which damage occurs. The dark bedroom where the screen glows, the dark in which the cortisol spikes, the dark that the digital sun refuses to let you enter. And in doing so, we may have inadvertently reinforced the modern assumption that darkness is emptiness, that it is the absence of something, the void left behind when the light goes away. This assumption is wrong. Darkness is not an absence. Darkness is a state. It is an active, specialized, biologically essential condition that your body requires in order to perform its most critical functions. Everything important that happens at night happens because it is dark. The glymphatic system that flushes beta amyloid from the brain operates most efficiently in the deep sleep that only properly timed darkness can produce. The growth hormone that repairs muscle tissue and maintains bone density is released in its largest pulse during the first cycle of deep sleep. The memory consolidation that transfers the day's learning from the hippocampus to the cortex occurs during sleep stages that depend on an intact circadian rhythm. The emotional processing that allows the brain to integrate difficult experiences and reduce their effective charge happens during REM sleep, which is most abundant in the final hours of a properly timed night. Creativity itself, the ability to form novel associations between disparate ideas, has been shown in study after study to depend on sleep, and specifically on the kind of sleep that emerges from a body that has been allowed to transition fully and naturally into the dark. Darkness is not where you go when the interesting part of life is over. Darkness is where the most important work gets done. It is the laboratory, the repair shop, the archive, the artist's studio. It is the space in which the brain consolidates everything it learned during the day and prepares itself to learn again tomorrow. Without it, intelligence degrades. Without it, emotional resilience thins. Without it, the immune system falters, the metabolism drifts, the cardiovascular system ages prematurely, and the mind loses its capacity for the very creativity and insight that we so desperately try to fuel with more hours of wakefulness and more stimulation from screens. We stay up late to be more productive, and in doing so, we destroy the biological process that makes productivity possible. We sacrifice the dark to gain more light, and we lose the thing that only the dark can give. To turn off the screen, then, is not a small thing. It is not a lifestyle tip. It is not a hack. It is a radical act of biological self-reclamation. It is the decision to honor a contract that your body signed with the rotating earth long before you were born, long before your species existed, long before the first neuron fired in the first brain of the first organism that ever distinguished day from night. When you turn off the screen and sit in the amber glow of a warm light, or better yet, in the honest dark, you are not depriving yourself of anything. You are returning to something. You are stepping back into the temporal river that has carried every living thing on this planet for billions of years, and you are letting it carry you too, downstream, toward sleep, toward repair, toward restoration, toward the quiet, ancient rhythm that your body has been aching to find. Think of a traveler who has been walking for days through a landscape of relentless, blinding light. No shade, no dusk, no relief. The eyes burn, the skin tightens, the mind narrows to a single, exhausted focus on putting one foot in front of the other. And then, at last, a bend in the road, a grove of trees, an inn with a low door and warm walls and windows that glow with the soft, amber light of something that is not the sun. The traveler steps inside, the door closes, the glare disappears, And for the first time in longer than memory, the traveler's shoulders drop, the jaw unclenches, the breath deepens, not because something has been added, but because something has been removed. The assault has stopped. The body, freed from the relentless demand to defend against the light, begins to do what it has been waiting to do. It softens, it opens, it heals. You can be that traveler tonight. You can reach the inn. You can close the door. Begin by dimming the lights in your home as the evening progresses. Let the illumination follow the arc that the sky would follow if you were living by its rhythm. Bright in the afternoon, softer in the evening, dim as night approaches, dark when it arrives. Replace the blue-white overhead lights with amber or red-toned alternatives. Light a candle if you can. There is nothing frivolous about candlelight. It is the spectrum your biology expects. Let the screens go dark, one by one. Not with the feeling of deprivation, but with the understanding that you are opening a gate that has been held shut all evening by the wrong kind of light. A gate that leads to melatonin, to deep sleep, to glymphatic clearance, to immune restoration, to hormonal balance, to the quiet, powerful, essential work that only the dark can do. In the days that follow, notice what changes, not just in your sleep, though that may improve quickly, but in the quality of your mornings, in the steadiness of your energy, in the clarity of your thinking, in the strange, subtle, hard-to-name feeling of being more at home in your own body, more synchronized, more whole. This is re-entrainment. This is the master clock finding its signal again. This is the orchestra hearing the conductor again, one instrument at a time, the rhythm returning, the dissonance fading, the music beginning to sound once more like music. And now, as we reach the end, I want to ask something of you. Not as a scientist or a narrator, but as a fellow traveler in this strange, too bright world. I want you to notice, right now, the space behind your eyes, that small, private, interior darkness that is always there, waiting for you, even when your eyes are open. Feel it. It is soft. It is deep. It has been there since before you were born, and it will be there after every screen has gone dark for the last time. It is the original darkness, the darkness your pineal gland remembers, the darkness your master clock is calibrated to, the darkness in which every meaningful act of biological restoration you will ever experience takes place. Feel the weight of your eyelids, not as a burden, but as an invitation. They are heavy because they are ready. Your body has been waiting for this. Your melatonin has been waiting for this. Your glymphatic system, your immune cells, your weary heart, your overtaxed visual cortex, they have all been waiting, patiently, faithfully, for the moment when the light finally fades and the real work of the night can begin. Let the room grow darker. Let the sounds of the world grow softer. Let the thoughts that have been circling all day begin to slow, to lose their edges, to drift apart like clouds at the end of an evening sky. You do not need to chase them. You do not need to solve them. They will be there in the morning, and you will meet them with a mind that has been cleaned and restored and made ready by the deepest, oldest, most essential force your biology has to offer. The dark is not your enemy. The dark is your home. You have been away from it for too long, wandering in the artificial day, and now, at last, you can return. Close your eyes. Let the shadows in. Let them heal you. The night is here, and it has been waiting for you.